Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Psalm 21, where we read of thanksgiving on behalf of the king. Suggested that Psalm 20 and Psalm 21 are a unit. Psalm 20 gives prayer for God to save the king. And now, as we come to Psalm 21, this is thanksgiving that God has saved the king. So it's the part two, it's the next step in the process. We begin with the superscription for the choir director, a psalm of David, very simple. And now notice, O Lord, in your strength, the king will be glad. He will rejoice. You have given him his heart's desire. You have not withheld the request of his lips. So all throughout, we're seeing what God has done for the king, how salvation has been brought to him, not just salvation, but what he wanted, what he asked for, what he's requested. This has all been given to him. We continue still with what God has done for the king. For you, speaking to God, you meet him with the blessings of good things. You set a crown of fine gold on his head. He asked life of you. You give it to him. Length of days. Notice how life is the same thing as length for days. You say it and then you repeat it, but with different words. That's what's happening here. Length of days forever and ever. Verse 5, his glory is great through your salvation. Now, when we talk about his glory, the glory of the king, that's our old friend kabod. The Hebrew word there literally means heaviness. But glory works because remember, when something was heavy, they esteemed it to be of value. They didn't have coins, so you didn't have a $5 bill and a $20 bill, and they both weighed the same. No, you would weigh out, for example, gold or silver, and the heavier it was, the more value it had. So that's the idea here when we talk about this kind of glory. His glory, his value, his esteem is great through your salvation. Splendor and majesty you place upon him. For you make him the most blessed forever. You make him joyful with gladness in your presence. For the king, and verse 7 is sort of the culmination of all these things, the king trusts in the Lord. And through the loving kindness of the Most High, he will not be shaken. So the king is secure. Those are all the things that God has done for the king. Now, we saw, thanks for what God has done for the king. That's verses 1 through 7. But beginning in verse 8, now there's a change. This is what God is going to do to his enemies. You say, when you speak of his enemies, is the enemies of God? Is it the enemies of the king? And the answer is yes. It's both. It's not one or the other. Because the king is walking with the Lord, so sort of the idea: your friends are my friends, and your enemies are my enemies. So that's that. I think that's the idea behind this, and I think we're going to see this regularly through the Psalms. Verse 8, then, your hand will find out all your enemies. And so this is speaking of the enemies, like I said, of the king, of the Lord. It's not one or the other, it's both. Your right hand will find out those who hate you. You will make them as a fiery oven in the time of your anger. Notice the them is still the enemies. The Lord will swallow them up in his wrath, and fire will devour them. What happens to the enemies of the king, the enemies of the Lord. And of course, when you're reading about the king, you say, are we talking about King David? Or is this perhaps also looking to the king who was greater than David, the eventual son of David? I'm not talking about Solomon. I'm talking about the final descendant, the seed of David, that is Jesus. And again, the answer is yes. It's all of the above. Verse 10, their offspring you will destroy. Notice when we speak of their offspring, and then we have their descendants, literally their seed. Both ideas are here. It's two different ways of saying the same thing. You will destroy from the earth their descendants from among the sons of men. Both ideas here in parallel. Verse 11, though they intended evil against you and devised a plot, they will not succeed. Part of God's judgment is that the plots of the ones that are going to be judged are overturned. Indeed, it falls back upon themselves. I think of the story in the book of Esther of Haman, the Agagite, the Haman, who planned the destruction not just of Mordecai, his personal enemy, but of all the Jewish people. And remember how that ended, where instead it was the very enemies of the Jewish people that themselves were destroyed. So here he devises a plot. They will not succeed. Verse 12, for you will make them turn their back. You will aim your bowstrings at their faces. And so God overcomes their plots, and instead he is the one who wins at the end of the day. We culminate this psalm, and it's not a very long psalm. Be exalted, O Lord, in your strength. We will sing and praise your power. So this is the conclusion. And notice we have thanksgiving when God blesses his people, but also when God judges those who were against him, when he overturns their plots. And there's a sense in which we Christians have been in both of these. You say, well, I can see where we've been the ones who have been blessed by God. But if you didn't start off in the Christian faith, and that describes a great many of us, if you weren't brought up in the Christian faith, if you came to Christ, that means he reached out, and in a sense, he did this to all of us. He reached out and grabbed us and overcame us and made us his captives and brought us to himself and saved us, not because we chose him, but because he chose us. And so there, it's not that I'm judged for my sins, but Jesus was judged in my place so that I can be treated as one who has been judged, and those sins were judged upon Jesus. And now the barrier of enmity, the barrier of hatred has been broken down, and I have been brought to that place of blessing.